Hello Blockhead friends, this is Sarah here again, friend of Moda, to present to you another fabulous block. This week we are presenting block number 12, presented by Yoder of Coriander Quilts. Don't forget to download your pattern and join me back here and we'll get started with our block. Okay, for this block, we're going to make that ever-fearful block, the flying goose, or the flying geese block. A goose, geese, a gaggle, whatever. We're going to be making a gaggle of these for this block. And actually, you're going to be making, on this step, we're making two different blocks. You're going to make it in two different colorways to use within your bigger quilt. Or you can just make one, however you choose to do. But we're going to show you in this block how to make flying geese. We're going to be showing you how to make it in the one at a time method and the 4 at a time method. So gather all of your supplies and let's get started. So for this block, I've got all of my units already laid out here. Again, I've labeled all of my units with my little sticky and my little wonder clips. You know, these wonder clips are great for anything that you are going to be using. You know, I've seen people use it in their hair. Now my hair is not long enough to clip back, but you can use them for just about anything. They're fabulous to have just all around your house. So I've got all of my units marked here, and we're going to start out with our single flying geese unit first. So let me gather those pieces together and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I've gathered all of my units and my pieces that we're going to be using to construct our single flying geese units. So we're going to be using some 5 by 2 3/4 inch rectangles, and I've got 3 different colors of those. And then we're going to be using our 2 3/4 inch. For those of you that might not know, this unit, the rectangle unit, is your goose unit, your geese unit, and this is your sky unit. Your squares that go on the stitch and flip corners are your sky units. So I've got these all laid out. I'm just going to pick one of my colors right now to share how you would lay these out. I'm going to unclip all of my units here, and we're going to start out with one of our rectangles. Now it's really important when you're making these units, we're going to be sewing one corner on first, we're going to be pressing that and then trimming, and then we're going to sew the other corner on with that. So I'm going to lay you'll notice I have already drawn my line on the back of these squares. I did use my favorite sew line chalk pencil to mark these units because it is a darker fabric on there. But I'm going to lay this on my rectangle, and you're going to notice that I've got it going from the top center to the lower corner here. Now that is the way that you want this flying geese square to be, or the sky square to lay on here, so that you get the perfect flying geese unit. So we're going to go and we're going to sew all of these, and I'm actually going to sew all of my colors. I'm going to chain piece. This is a great way to chain piece these so that we can get these all together. So I'm going to sew directly on the line or just a scant to the right of that line to give me that perfect unit. So I'll sew these and I'll meet you back here with the finished product. Okay, we are back, and I have the one sky unit sewn onto my rectangle, the geese units. But I want to show you how I'm going to trim that. And again, I want to share the extra little tip. If you want some extra little half square triangles, you sew an additional stitching line just to the 1/4 inch, about a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch, whatever you're comfortable with. I usually use the edge of my presser foot to sew that secondary line. And then I'm going to trim this away. So I get my ruler, I trim in between those 2 stitching lines, I trim it, and flip that back. Again, I press it before I trim it because I feel like it gives me a more square unit, and it doesn't let these bias edges move around after if you've trimmed it and then you press it. So I've got my extra little half square units that you can have when you're done. So I've trimmed all of this up, and I'm ready now to place my second sky unit on my flying geese rectangle. So this is the important step. You want to make sure that you've got your diagonal line going the correct way to give you a goose unit. Because if you place it this way, you're going to get a parallelogram unit. I'm going to show you here. That's not what you want. we want a flying geese unit. So I'm going to flip my diagonal so that it is opposite, going to the opposite corner from the first one that I sewed down. And it doesn't matter. Some people are like, do you sew the right one on first or the left one on first? It doesn't matter which one you sew on first. Whatever you're more comfortable with, you pick which direction. It doesn't give you a different block. You're still going to end up with a 1/4 inch up here at the top and your sky units to either corner. So let's go sew this down again on the line or just to the right of that line, and we'll come back with our completed single flying geese units. Okay, we're back. And I forgot to mention earlier that you're going to be making 6 of these single flying geese units. Now you'll notice I've got 2 of 3 different colors here. You don't have to use 3 different colors. You can use 1 color. Now, one of the things I've not pointed out before is when you print out your block, you're going to get one of these lovely coloring pages. So you can have fun. It's almost more fun sometimes. If I'm sitting late at night watching TV, I want to do some coloring. I get out my colored pencils or markers, and I just kind of color up the blocks. So you can create your block however you want. Just because my colorway that I've chosen, I needed 2 of 3 different colors for a total of 6. So have fun with the blocks. All of these blocks are yours to make however you want to within this process. So now we've got these units. Now you want to double check that you've got them the correct size, because it'll make, once you do, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like the trimming part. The trimming part makes for a more perfect block for you in the end. So it is worth the extra time just to do some of that trimming up. So we're going to trim this. This unit is trimmed to 5 inch by 2 3/4 inch. So I always like to use a ruler that's bigger than what I need, unless I have that exact size, but with these rectangles, they don't make all these funky rectangle size units. So I'm using, for this block, a 6.5 inch square unit to square up with. And one of the things you wanted at 5 inches by 2 3/4. The important thing when squaring up this unit is you want from tip to tip your 5 inch mark here so that you're going to get that perfect corner. So you can see I don't have that much to trim off. I probably would not trim that. Well, we can trim it, and you can actually see how much I would trim off of my little block just from the sheer stretching of that. I mean, it's just a sliver of fabric there. Now, one thing I also wanted to point out too is you want to make sure that you have a 1/4 inch from the tip of your goose to the outside edge of that unit that you've squared up. That way you don't get a flat-nosed goose when you sew it into your block. So there I've trimmed it up. You'll notice I do have a 1/4 inch from the top to the top of that goose. So let's trim up the rest of our units, and we're going to move on to our next step of making 4 geese units at a time. Okay, we are back after trimming up our single flying geese units, and we're going to be making our 4 at a time flying geese units. For this, you're going to have one big square, which this square for this size that we're going to be making is 3 3/4 inch, and we have 8 2 1/4 inch squares that are our sky for this unit. So I've got 2 different colors. Again, you don't have to use 2 different colors. You can use 1 color for these smaller flying geese units. These are a smaller unit, so that's what makes this a little bit easier to make them 4 at a time. That you're not dealing with tiny squares. You're working with a little bit bigger units. So I did go ahead, when I do this method, I do like to go ahead and draw my line on here. Using the diagonal seam tape or whatever, if you've got another marking method on your sewing machine, I find that this method gives me a more accurate piecing because I can use my presser foot as my guide on this instead of trying to line up the corners on my blocks on the corners. So we're going to take our bigger square and we're going to lay it down, and we're going to put 2 squares parallel with each other, actually right on top of each other, so that my drawn lines are even, that they go from the top corner down to the bottom corner, that they line up perfectly. Now, it doesn't matter which one of these squares is on top. It really doesn't matter. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch from the drawn line. What is a scant 1/4 inch seam, do you say? It is 1 thread less than your normal 1/4 inch seam. You want to give yourself enough room because by the time we get done with this unit, we're going to square it up. And we want to make sure that we have ample room to give you that perfect square up size. So let's go to the machine and we'll sew these 2 squares onto the larger square and come back here and show you the next step. Okay, we're back. And I did forget to mention before I went to the sewing machine that you're going to sew on both sides of your drawn line, the scant 1/4 inch. So you're going to have a block that this looks really funky, doesn't it? But you've got your drawn line and then you've got your scant 1/4 inch on either side of that line. So the next step is you're going to take your ruler and you're going to cut it diagonally on the line that was drawn on the smaller squares. So you're just going to take and slice and dice it. And then you've got, because I'm making 2 different squares, you've got 4 different units that look like this. And you're like, boy, how am I going to get flying geese units out of something that looks like this? Now I'm going to do a quick finger press to show you, and then I'm going to take it to the machine or to the iron to show you how to press it. But you're going to take and even get a funkier unit when you go press it. It looks like, I don't know, it looks like a little crown with some little things on it, a little hat, little, I don't know what to call it, or you can put it like this. It looks like some mountains on top of a valley. But you've got this unit that looks like this, so you're going to go press them. You're going to press your units to look like this, and then meet me back here and I'll show you how to line up the next square. Okay, so now we've got our units like this, and we've still got some squares left over. Well, how am I going to line this up? Super easy. We are going to line that square up with that remaining corner of the goose unit. The goose unit is the bigger square that we had used, and the sky unit are the smaller squares. So we're going to line this up so that that diagonal line dissects between the 2 mountain points that you had on that funky little block before. We're going to do the same thing like we just did. We're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch on either side of that drawn line, and then we're going to come back here and cut things apart. Okay, we are back, and now we've got our unit sewn together with either stitching line on either side of that drawn line there. So you're just going to take your ruler, again, like we did on the first step, and you're just going to cut it on that drawn line that you have there, and you're going to end up with 2 units that look like this. So we've got 2 units from each of those little funky things, so you end up with 4. So now it's time to trim these up. Now, we're going to be trimming this unit to 1 5/8 by 2 3/4. Okay, I know that a lot of people don't like that 5/8 number or 3/8 or 7/8. That's, you know, oh, that's a dreaded number. Remember, it's just a line on your ruler. It's just a line on your ruler for that. So what I would highly suggest, they're not going to make a ruler that is that exact size. So I am using a 3.5 inch square ruler here, and you can see that I have drawn, might be able to see it better here, maybe we can see it better here. We can see it better there with that camera. So I have drawn with a black Sharpie on my acrylic ruler. Don't worry, it'll come off. You just use rubbing alcohol or nail polish remover. It will take those lines away whenever you're done with that. But I drew my lengthwise line on the 1 5/8 and then a 2 3/4 inch line there. Okay, so I've got it ready and I've got it marked, and we are going to line this up. Now you can see that there is plenty. I always like to make sure that I have plenty of extra around the outside, that I don't get kind of a wonky trim on there. So I look and make sure that I have got plenty of space to trim around all 4 sides of this unit. Now what I'm also looking at is I'm making sure that I have a 1/4 inch at the tip of the goose, so that I don't end up with the flat-nosed goose. And I'm also making sure that this long vertical line is at the diagonal of each of those points of the geese here, the sky of the geese. Now, if I would flip this around, you could see that the diagonal on the ruler is actually on the diagonal of that goose. So you can place your ruler either direction that you want. And again, the point of that ruler and the point of my 2 3/4 inch line is right there. So I'm going to do this quick, since I've got my unit laying out like this, I'm going to lay my ruler like this here, get it lined up, and I'll show you how to do this quick trim. So I'm going to trim one side, I'm going to trim the other. Now, if you can use a rotating mat if you have a rotating mat, but because this is a unit that you're going to have to lift up your ruler, it's not when you're going to leave it down, you're going to do this. You're going to flip it and hold it, and you want to really press down on your square ruler so it doesn't slip and slide, so that you get a very clean square up. So you end up with a unit that looks like this. I'm going to show you one more time how I line this up, and I'll show you on a different color. It might be a little bit easier to see on this unit here. So I'm gonna turn my unit this way here. Actually, I'm going to turn it this way, so that I can trim a little more at ease instead of having to twist around and move around. So I've got that diagonal lined up with the diagonal of the goose. I'm making sure that I have a 1/4 inch from the tip to where my drawn line is, and that my 2 3/4 is here and the corner of the ruler is here. So trim, trim, flip that unit, line up the 2 lines that I already have, which should line that up perfectly. I'll do trim and trim, and we've got your perfect flying geese smaller unit that measures 1 5/8 by 2 3/4. I'm going to go ahead and trim up my other units, and then we're going to sew these together to make one of our corner units. Okay, we are back. All of the smaller flying geese are squared up, trimmed to the correct size, and you know, I just like, whenever I'm working, I like to keep, until I finish my block, I like to keep my little trimmings over to the side, just because it makes me happy to know that I'm going to have a fun square block whenever I get done. So now we're going to lay out the different units within this, because it ends up being a 4-patch block. We're going to lay out the different units to show how we're going to put this all together. Okay, so our first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay out these units that we just completed. And the way that my colorway is going, we're going to sew this in columns. Okay, so we're going to have one column with 2 going at the top and 2 at the bottom. So we're going to sew this column together, we're going to sew this column together, and then we're going to sew the 2 columns together. When I press this, and I'll show you the pressing once I get this all sewn together, I'm going to press one column going down and one column going up so that my seams will nest. We've got lots of seams coming to meet here because of these flying geese units, so we want it to be as flat as possible. So we're going to sew this unit together, and then I'm also going to show you how we're going to sew the bigger single geese that we had made earlier. I'm going to slide this over here to the side, and then we'll go do all of our sewing and then meet back here. So this is a little bit easier sewing. You're just going to be sewing each of your 2, you're going to be sewing 2 together. Like for my colorway, it is, I've got 2 of the same color. We're going to be sewing them so that both geese are flying in the same direction. So they're both going to be flying like this, because you would get a whole different look. You would get a snowball look by making flying geese, but that's not the look we want. We want your geese to be flying in the same direction. So you'll lay out all of these. I can do a lot of chain piecing here within this unit. And I'll lay those all out, take these to my sewing machine along with my smaller ones, and we'll get them sewn together and we'll meet back here. Okay friends, we are back with our completed pairs of flying geese units. I wanted to show you how I did the pressing on these units. So I've got the 2 flying geese going in the same direction. On the back, when I sewed those together, I did press that seam open so it doesn't give you like a big bump in between the 2 blocks on that. So that's how I pressed those. And then my little 8 geese unit, we've got together like this. So on the back, again, I pressed one of the columns one way and one of the columns the other way. And then when I sewed the columns together, I pressed that seam open. gives you just a much flatter block, and you've got some of the bulk taken care of in the middle. Now, I'm not going to show you really up close, but if you would really look up close here, one of my geese has a little blunt nose, and that's okay. He can still fly with the flock just because he's a special friend that's going to be joining our quilt. Don't stress out if you end up with a blunt-nosed goose. It's going to be fine in the overall picture of your quilt. So now I've got my units laid out here as shown on the diagram. And actually this one I think is supposed to, nope, this one goes like that. So I've got them all laid out. And with the magic of TV, ta-da! Here is the completed block all sewn together. Again, when I did the pressing on this block, I pressed, oh, okay. You know, I said pay attention to which direction that you are placing your blocks. When I pulled up my completed block, I saw that I had laid that out incorrectly according to the diagram. Now, there's nothing wrong with that block. That block can look just like that if you would like it to. But if you want it to look like the picture in the diagram and the way that I have it here, you'll want to flip that around when you sew it together. So I wanted to share with you how I did the pressing on this block. Again, it's a 4-patch unit. You're going to press one row to the left, one to the right, and then my center seam, I did press it open. So then it makes a nice completed block like this. It's going to be a 9-inch finished block when you get done. And actually with this step, you make 2 of these blocks. And so here are my 2 colorways that I have used with this unit here for block number 12. Also, I think we pointed out in one of my previous videos, I'm kind of the crazy girl. I am a pink girl, so when I saw this design and this layout, I thought, I need to make another one. And so I am using all pinks. So here are my 2 pink blocks that I have made that you're going to see at the end, my big pink finish with this quilt also. So that is this week's tutorial on single flying geese units and 4 at a time flying geese units. We want to thank Corey Yoder for sharing with us this great block. Again, it is called Flight Path because it's got all of the flying geese that are flying in whatever path they want to fly in for this week. We look forward to seeing you next week and enjoy your sewing time. Bye, everyone.